Alright guys, welcome to the next video in my open world meta event build series, and this is the Engineer. So for the Engineer, there isn't really a satisfying DPS support hybrid. I think Engineer is just suited towards playing a pure DPS role, which is totally viable in open world meta events because there are going to be certain buffers out there. If people are playing some of the other builds I've recommended, that will just buff this guy and make him able to do his top DPS. So with that said, the build that I'm recommending that you can see me playing now is the Kitless Holo. I believe that Kitless Holo has a bit of an advantage for your average Guild Wars 2 player compared to the normal raid build, and as a result, I would have no trouble recommending this build to a new Engineer player who wants to pick up the class and who finds it interesting. It's a very powerful build with very high DPS potential and relatively easy to learn rotation that you can pick up quite quickly. And those are the things that I sort of prize in an open world DPS build. I want my open world DPS builds to have very simple, easy to learn looping rotations, as well as good DPS potential that doesn't make it feel like you're playing a gimped build simply for the purpose of it being easier. I want them to be easy and have good DPS, and this build is quite capable of doing that. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get into the traits and go from there. Alright guys, so we're going to talk about the gear for the Kitless Holo. You will just go with full Berserker armor with Rune of the Scholar, full Berserker trinkets, and then a sword and pistol that are Berserker with Rune of Force, or Sigil of Force, and Sigil of Impact. The gearing is just very simple, very straightforward. You can play this in exotics, and still, I believe you will still crit cap, so you don't even really have to worry about the difference of feeling bad on using exotics if you're just starting out in the game. It's a very simple and straightforward thing to gear for your character, and you can buy everything you need off the trading post to have this set up in exotics in no time. So gear, super simple. And one last thing I want to say about the gear is if you do feel like you need additional CC, you can use a shield instead of the offhand pistol. The pistol does add a little bit of DPS, but the shield adds a little bit of CC. And there's a lot of times, especially if you might be playing solo, where having a little bit of CC will help your survivability out. And if that is the case for you, consider going with shield instead. And I know there are a lot of people out there who do enjoy that the sword and board look and play style, even though I guess it's not really a play style, it's mostly just a role play look thing. But hey, if sword and shield is your bag and you don't want to play sword and pistol, then go for it. The pistol does add a little bit of DPS, but not a ton, and overall you can use shield if you want, but I would recommend the pistol. Anyway guys, so with that said, let's get off of gear and move on to traits. Alright guys, so traits for the Kitless Holo. We go with explosives, firearms, and holosmith. I will say, however, if you do need the additional utility of tools, the extra dodges and some of the defensive capabilities that has, you can get rid of explosives and use tools, and you will lose a little bit of DPS, but with static discharge you actually make up a little bit as well. But by and large, explosives is the way you want to go, and I wouldn't run tools unless you felt you absolutely needed it. But feel free to try it both ways and go with what you find most useful for you. So with that said, explosives, I recommend Glass Cannon for DPS increase, Big Boomer for DPS and survivability increase, and then Orbital Command for DPS increase at the Grandmaster. In the Kit Holo with Bomb Kit and Grenade Kit, you get a lot more use out of Shrapnel. In the Kitless Holo, you do not benefit from Shrapnel, so it turns out that Orbital Command is the way to go for Kitless. In Firearms, we take High Caliber for a crit chance increase, No Scope will allow us to self-buff with Fury a little bit, as well as giving us some Ferocity. And then Modified Ammunition, especially at meta events, is just insanely good. When you're at Octovine or at like Jack Garrett or any of these, or Shatter, or any of these big world boss type situations, you can pretty much imagine that the target is going to have every Condi in the game on it. And when that's the case, your DPS goes through the roof with Modified Ammunition. It's very, very good. And so for Holosmith, we are going to take Solar Focusing Lens, which is a DPS increase. We're going to take Eclipse at the major tier. And you might say, well, why Eclipse? All it does is give stability and barrier. Why not take Storm for the DPS increase? It would be a DPS increase in a normal situation, in a vacuum, except for the fact that it prevents you from getting a second application of your top DPS skills in HoloForge because it heats you up too fast. So it's not of a benefit. However, I do find that the stability from Corona Burst is actually very useful in a lot of places. A lot of meta events like Shaq Garrett or Death Branded Shatterer, there is quite a bit of CC that the enemies can put on you. And having random applications of stability helps a lot. And you might say, well, it's only 4 seconds every so often. However, when you have enough chronos around who are using Signet of Inspiration, what you'll find is that oftentimes your stability will have you'll look down and you'll notice you have like 4 stacks of stability, and they each have like 16 seconds on them. So you are doing really, really well as far as having perma-stability at these big events. So it turns out to be a much more useful thing in practice than you might expect. And then at the Grandmaster, we take Photonic Blasting Module. This essentially changes our playstyle to where, much like the raid build, you want to overheat, blow yourself up, and then gain a big DPS increase after you do so. And when we talk about the rotation, it will make sense why we would want to do this if the 15% damage boost that we get isn't a reason enough. So talking about skills that we're going to bring, we want to bring Rifle Kit, or Rifle Turret, I should say. Rifle Turret doesn't do a lot of damage, but what it does do is it gives us the Tool Belt skill Surprise Shot, which does do a lot of damage on a very short cooldown. With Alacrity, you're popping this thing off very rapidly, and it's a very nice DPS increase. Photon Wall, the active, when we've overheated, is actually pretty decent damage, and it gives us another Tool Belt skill that is on a low cooldown. So we're going to be able to smash these two Tool Belt skills on a very low cooldown. Laser Disc is a powerful DPS increase for us once we are past the heat threshold. And then it also gives us a Tool Belt skill that does pretty respectable DPS. And then our Elite is going to be Prime Light Beam, which is a CC and a powerful DPS skill once we are over the 50% heat threshold. Now, heal skill, generally speaking, you probably want to use Healing Turret because it's a Condi cleanse, it gives regen, and it can be a burst heal, an AoE burst heal. However, there are arguments to be made for taking AED. If you know you're at a place where you can get one shot out of the blue, or you can get one shot and there are big tells that will warn you that you're about to get one shot, AED is pretty good because it allows you to kind of just ignore the damage and just keep ticking. But by and large, I would recommend taking healing turret overall. So that's it for traits and skills. When we talk about the rotation, there's a little bit of preface that I need to mention about everything, and then I'll give you a demonstration. Stick around. All right, so before I demonstrate the rotation, I think the most important thing to explain to a player that's never played Holo before is that you have this bar above your weapon skills, your heat meter. And there's a little black line in the middle that shows when you're over the 50% threshold. A lot of your skills such as particle accelerator, blade burst, photon wall, laser disc, prime light beam, and sword 2 refraction cutter. They all do additional damage or have additional effects when you're above 50%. In almost every case, except for your tool belt skills, which you want to use on cooldown, in almost every case, you pretty much only want to use these when you're above 50%. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind is to get the most effectiveness out of your skills, you have to use them when you're over 50% heat. When I explain the rotation, you will understand how that works, and the rotation loops very well and is very repeatable. So it's very it's difficult to make mistakes with when you use them, unless you get really disrupted by like going down in a fight or having to dodge a whole bunch. But by and large, it's very straightforward. But if you've never played Holo before, it's the thing that's most immediately distracting is having to pay attention to your heat. But again, if you're doing everything right and you're practicing the rotation, paying attention to your heat becomes second nature, and it's not particularly difficult to work with. So anyway, guys, let's talk about the rotation. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is drop our turret, use our tool belt skills, then go into Photon Forge, and we are going to use Holo Forge skill 4, and then skill 3, and then we're going to auto attack until we hit the 50% heat threshold. And we will continue to use our tool belt skills as they come off cooldown. Once we hit 50% heat, we can use laser disc, and then we can also use our elite skill to do a bit of extra damage in Holo Forge. And then as we're getting to the end, we're going to use skill 3, and then we want to make sure that skill 4 is the very last thing we use before we overheat. And then as soon as we exit and back into normal mode, we want to do sword 2, pistol 4, and then keep using our tool belt skills. So then we're going to use our photon shield and activate it for a nice big blast as long as we're over 50%. You want to keep auto attacking with sword as well as using your tool belt skills on cooldown. And as long as we're over 50% heat, you want to use sword 2. Once we dip below 50% heat, you don't want to use sword 2 anymore. And so we continue to use, as we cool down, we're going to continue to use our tool belt skills off cooldown. We're going to use sword 2 off cooldown while we're above 50%. And we're going to use pistol 4 on cooldown. As we get towards being cooled off, when we go back into Photon Forge, we are going to use skill 4 and skill 3 again, as you'll see. And then again, we're going to auto attack until we hit 50% health, and then we are going to fire off our laser disc. And then we're going to auto a few times until skill 3 and 4 are ready to go. And we'll use those and then overheat. And then just like that, it loops, and you're going to go back and do your normal outside of Photon Forge rotation where you use skill 2 above 50%, skill 4 off cooldown, photon wall when you're above 50%, and then keep doing your tool belt skills on cooldown. And it loops like that pretty much endlessly. That's all there really is to learn for it, and you can just practice doing that over and over again, and you will get there. Again, like I said, I didn't want this build to be an especially difficult rotation, and it's definitely not difficult rotation. And I believe a new player with a little bit of practice, a new player to NG with a little bit of practice, can learn this in no time. So yeah, it's great, and I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, guys, so that's it. I want to thank you guys for watching this. This is the first, again, of the DPS videos. Not every build, not every class, like I said, has a good hybrid damage support build, such as the Firebrand or the Renegade. Some classes just lend themselves well to being DPS orientated and dishing out the maximum damage possible. And an NG is one of them. And in my opinion, the best open world NG DPS build is the Power Kitless Holo. Hopefully you guys agree and you enjoy it and you have fun with it. If you have any questions, hit me up below. Any experienced NG players out there who have any tips they'd like to share, feel free to add those below. But that's it, guys. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. More videos in this series to come.